I'm somewhat aimlessly wandering through the Prado Museum in Madrid when I'm struck by this painting. I can't pull my eyes away from it. It's still life with a sparrowhawk, fowl, porcelain and shells, painted in 1611 by the Flemish artist Clara Peeters. Little did I know that this painting would lead me into a world of symbolism, gender and class politics, collecting and murder. Welcome to Articulate. I'm Daniel Trump and I'd like to take you back to that April afternoon in the Prado. To be honest, I came to the Prado to see the Grand Masters, Velázquez, Goya, El Greco, Rubens, Rembrandt, Bosch, Raphael, you get the idea. I didn't come to see still life paintings, I came to see portraits and landscapes. I came for drama, for history, for transcendence. This is viewing art as a process of FOMO, fear of missing out, something I'll have to come back to later in this episode. And yet this painting, a table laden with dead birds, porcelain bowls and seashells, stopped me in my tracks. At first it seemed serene, then violent, a tableau of contradictions. There are at least 18 dead birds, and one living or possibly living bird. The mallard duck at the centre draws your eye first, lying atop a basket with a woodcock and a partridge. Nearby a rooster hen, a thrush, 2 plucked pigeons ready for roasting, a red bullfinch and about 8 tiny songbirds bound together by the neck. Above them, perched upright, is the sparrowhawk, alive but frozen, regal or possibly lifeless. The Prado's curatorial notes suggest that Peeters may have sketched it from a taxidermied specimen, so even the illusion of life may be an illusion. The technical mastery of the painting becomes ever more apparent as we spend time with it. The detailed depiction of feathers, beaks, skin and talon, this copious corporeality. The colour contrasts, most obviously between the red breast of the bullfinch and the green head of the mallard, but also the more subtle, muted tones contrasting with highlights across the painting. It's at once an incredibly violent, peaceful scene. A maelstrom of murder and death depicted with a flowing rhythm of near gestalt fluidity. It drew me in. I was transfixed. What is it about this painting that I couldn't leave? This isn't just a still life, it's a still death. What I encountered was not just a painting about birds, but a meditation on mortality. The longer I stood in front of it, the clearer that became. This painting belongs to a tradition we now refer to as vanitas, an early modern genre, reminding us that life is fleeting, pleasures temporary, and death inevitable. In 17th century Northern Europe, vanitas paintings became a moral and aesthetic form of memento mori, and in Peeters' work every object participates in that symbolism. The dead birds are the spoils of a day's hunting, and the sparrowhawk could have been used to hunt the smaller birds. This set of birds represents a successful hunt from a large area of land, and the sparrowhawk signifies a person with wealth and possibly status. The birds' bodies are exquisitely rendered, their feathers luminous, their eyes extinguished. The crack porcelain, precious, imported, fragile, reminds us of worldly wealth and its impermanence. And the shells, so often overlooked, but in early modern art they often represented sensual beauty, the mysteries of the sea, and at times the ephemeral nature of desire. In this context, the painting operates as a visual meditation on death, dressed in the language of elegance. Art historian Alois Riegel, writing on the still life genre, emphasised the tension between abundance and decay, between the act of gathering and the certainty of loss. In Peeters' canvas, that tension is razor sharp. But this is not just a vanitas, it's also about power and who gets to look. The hawk is not just a bird, it's a symbol of aristocratic control. Falconry was reserved for the elite. It was a theatre of domination, a public display of ownership over both the animals and the landscape. But in Peeters' composition, the hawk is static, ambiguous, perhaps even impotent. Its eyes shine, but it doesn't hunt, it simply sits. The dominance it symbolises has been aestheticised, folded into the domestic setting of the still life. Art historian Svetlana Alpers, in The Art of Describing, argues that Dutch still life turns the viewer into a kind of voyeur, invited to scrutinise surfaces, textures and arrangements, but kept at a distance from human narrative. We see everything and understand nothing for certain. And then there is gender. Clara Peeters was a woman artist working in the Spanish Netherlands in the early 17th century, a rarity in itself. As scholars such as Linda Nochlin have argued, women were structurally excluded from genres like history painting or portraiture, because they were barred from studying anatomy or working with nude models. Still life was one of the few permissible genres, but Peeters doesn't simply comply, she innovates. This careful, calculated arrangement of death and domesticity is not passive, it's controlled, composed, assertive. The polish of the surfaces and the precision of the placement become a form of feminine mastery. The abundance of dead birds, especially game and songbirds, is a classical memento mori motif, reminding us of the ephemeral nature of life and the inevitability of death. We could say that the sparrowhawk, still apparently alive and dominated, symbolises death personified, a predator who reigns over the lifeless bodies beneath, enforcing the natural order of mortality. The delicate porcelain and shells symbolise both beauty and fragility, often associated with worldly pleasure and its fleetingness. The carefully arranged table acts as a display of aristocratic refinement and control over nature, suggesting status and cultivated taste, a refutation of the inevitable perhaps. The cut and plucked birds also hint at culinary preparation and the pleasures of the table, which in vanitas terms can reflect both sensual indulgence and its inevitable decline. Using a more art historical iconographic perspective, we could say that the painting draws on motifs of power, control and virtue. Let's come back to that sparrowhawk. It sits uneasily within the picture for me, but its upright posture and bright eye introduces the motif of the noble hunt, which is often linked to masculine power, control and aggression. However, in Peeters' treatment, the usual heroic or allegorical framing is displaced into the domestic realm. The predator hawk is rendered still and sculptural, and the prey are not strewn in a chaotic heap, but are meticulously arranged, and this maybe hints at feminine labour and control. She wasn't allowed to paint human flesh, so she painted bird flesh. She wasn't allowed to dissect bodies, so she dissected arrangement. In some sense, she turns the limitations placed upon her into the very structure of her artistry. Her painting becomes a statement, not just of mortality, but of agency in the face of exclusion. And let's come back to those 4 shells. There's a strong link here to collecting culture. These exotic shells are not culinary but collector's objects, suggesting connections to the Wunderkammer tradition. Their inclusion places the painting in dialogue with early modern debates about taxonomy, about the marvellous, and about natural philosophy. The juxtaposition of the natural, such as shells and birds, and artificial, such as porcelain and tableware, echoes the early scientific impulse to categorise and preserve. This juxtaposition could also be interpreted as having erotic undertones. In physical form, shells such as the pink-lipped conch were frequently coded as feminine or erotic. Further, the shells are exotic collectibles, objects of desire, wanting the attainable, bringing us back to death, fear of missing out, and inevitably, possibly, murder. Mortality is not a theme in this painting, it's the medium of the painting. The dead birds are not just depicted, they are the reason the painting exists. They make the painting possible, their silence becomes its speech. And in this, Peeters' still life invites comparison to other meditations on mortality, such as Hans Holbein's The Ambassadors, painted in 1533, with its hidden skull, which offers a lesson in perspective and death. And one of my favourite paintings in the Prado, Francisco de Zibarren's Agnus Dei, painted in 1635. It shows a bound lamb evoking Christ, sacrifice and innocence under threat. And Chardin's Ray, 1728, where the gutted fish becomes a grotesque metaphor for the passage from life to object. All these works show a desire to look unflinchingly at death, but to do so beautifully. Which brings us to philosopher Edmund Burke. In his book, Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, Burke argues the sublime is not found in beauty or harmony, but in vastness, terror and obscurity. It is what overwhelms us. Peeters' painting, for all its polish and precision, overwhelms by accumulation. So many deaths, so carefully displayed, violence made static, mortality made exquisite. And so I think back to why I came to the Prado. I came to see greatness, canonical works, fame. But this quiet, still life, a genre I might have once walked past, stopped me. It made me think not just about Peeters or birds or porcelain, but about myself, my desire to collect, to organise, to preserve, and the possible futility of all of that. Because death is indifferent to beauty, or perhaps more disturbingly, beauty is one of the ways we cope with death. And maybe that's what Clara Peeters knew. Maybe that's what she gave us, not just a still life, but a moment of contemplative confrontation, disguised in light, texture and control. If you enjoyed this episode of Articulate, please like, rate or share it with someone who also enjoys quietly devastating paintings. In the next episode, we'll explore the strange space between the dream and the canvas in Fuseli's The Nightmare. Until then, look closely and remember, the stillest paintings often have the most to say.